The time that I felt that I just knew it was being successful is when we meet prospects and clients and they say, "Oh, Onalytica is everywhere. I see all of your content in the feed. I see other people sharing some stuff." And that I think is really good qualitative examples. I think you need those stories. Myself and other people get asked to speak at great podcasts like this or at events, and that's a really good validation. And also, it's when you get inbound leads, I think, because I'm a big believer in content, community, and commerce. And if you create engaging content and then you have that community, then I think the commerce comes to you. So I just hear the stories on a week to week basis. And that's good enough for me, just knowing that it's driving business impact, we're getting the engagements, but I also can see the enjoyment that the staff have on building their personal brand. And I think that's a much sort of softer measurement for me that gives me personal satisfaction.
Welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast, the unique podcast series where we flip the marketing conversation from external to internal. We explore all the ways that you can build a brand and drive growth by engaging and empowering company employees to become advocates of the company brand. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I'm very happy to be bringing you this episode where we'll be discussing how a company can measure the success of its employee advocacy program. But before we get started, remember that building an employee advocacy program doesn't just happen overnight. It means that you need to be creating a stream of positive, engaging content to get them bought in and to encourage them to start sharing it. The best place to create that content is with Workshop. It's an internal email platform for creating beautifully branded, employee-specific campaigns. Head on over to useworkshop.com/marketing to learn more and download their complete guide to building an employee advocacy program of your own. And of course, Workshop is the global sponsor of Season 3 of the Internal Marketing Podcast. So thank you, Workshop. I'm happy to have you on board. So, let's jump into this conversation with my featured guest, Tim Williams. There'll be some great takeaways in this discussion because Tim is the CEO of Onalytica, and he'll be sharing about his company's employee advocacy journey and how they measure its success. Hi, Tim. Welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast. It's great to have you. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Kerry-Ann. I'm really honored to be on your podcast. So thanks so much.
I'm grateful that you accepted my invitation, and I think we are going to have another awesome discussion here today. I, of course, would have met you on LinkedIn. We had the opportunity to connect there. I was able to meet you virtually and Sarah on your own podcast live stream, which we'll hear more about that later on in this episode. But I'm very excited to speak with you for a couple of reasons. One, as I said to you in the green room, as it were, I always love the opportunity to speak to CEOs in a conversation like this around internal marketing employee advocacy because you have a very wonderful 360-degree view, particularly as it pertains to the different functional areas within an organization, and most importantly, the benefit that it brings to the business. Because at the end of the day, we're in business to make money, and you have that as your number one mandate. So I'm very, very excited about the nuggets that you're going to be sharing today. But as always, I like to start off my episodes with a level setting question. We do have a very wide audience of listeners from all over the world in different functional areas, not just marketing and communications. And I never like to assume that everybody knows everything about the nomenclatures that we're going to be referring to today. And so I wanted to kick off with a level setting question, as always, by inviting you in your own words to define for us from where you sit and in your experience what is employee advocacy. And by extension, what's an employee advocacy program when you talk about companies who have an employee advocacy program set up in their business?
Great. Fantastic. And I think it's the right question because it's really a new forming nascent category. So everyone's got a different definition. At Onalytica, we talk about executive leader and subject matter expert thought leadership. This is a segment of employee advocacy. And a lot of social vendors, that are social publishing and sort of helping employees publish on social, describe employee advocacy as the ability for brands to promote their content through employees. And I think that's very dangerous. I don't think it fosters the right culture. But I think that that is what has happened with a lot of brands. So from Onalytica's perspective, I think employee advocacy can be segmented into your executive leaders who have intrinsic value out there in the marketplace. And then you have your wider employees that might want to share some of the brand's content and get started in social. And then there's that middle layer of your internal experts who often don't want to just share content like everybody else, but they have wonderful expertise. And so at Onalytica, we just take a portion of employee advocacy and we call it something different. So executive and subject matter expert thought leadership, or exec and SME advocacy, as some people call it. That's where we focus on, and that's how I would define it.
Thanks, Tim. And it's great to introduce that perspective because I agree. Employee advocacy is still developing as an aspect of what I call I like to call it the kind of a promotional mix within marketing, brand building, sales, revenue generation. And it's great to have your perspective, particularly given the work that Analytica does. So in your experience, what are the benefits that an employee advocacy program such as you've described, what are the benefits that it brings to an organization, a business?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of key benefits when you distill it down. First of all, it encourages personal storytelling rather than you broadcasting from a brand. And, second of all, I think it just provides a more cost effective route to content creation. I think gone are the days when, brands, have to invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars to create these, massive pieces of content and research, and then they broadcast it to all of their target audience. I think now we're talking about this one to few rather than one to many model. It's much more about community. And I think when you look at your employees, it is the most cost effective way of you getting the message out there. And then added to that, if you have personal storytelling, the message is so much more effective and you will drive more engaging content. So I think those are the two real benefits that I see.
Thank you. And as we're talking about benefits, I'd love to hear from you personally, certainly from Analytica's perspective. If you could just share with us a quick peek into who Analytica is and what you do, and how does employee advocacy feed into your success as a business?
Yeah, so normally I'm the one asking the question. So this is really going into Onalytica, which is different, but I'm really happy to answer. We've got 50 employees, and we've got 7 in the US, and most of them in the UK, uh, in and around London. And so we're a small organization, trying to evangelize employee advocacy, influence, and marketing, and we provide software and supporting professional services. So we're trying to help mature a category, and we really can't do this just by ourselves. And if we just had a marketing engine and produced some white papers, some blogs, and went on LinkedIn Lives by ourselves, it just really wouldn't cut through. So the program at Onalytica, because we eat our own dog food and we have to we have to obviously practice what we preach, is that all of our exec leaders and everyone in the company is supported and invested in by internal marketing to be able to help them find their personal brand, to help them find their voice on social, and we encourage them to share their perspective, uh, just in terms of their own topics and passions, but also the inflection of where that hits influencer marketing and hits employee advocacy. And we have a team of 4, in marketing, so it's not obviously a really large team. And we encourage people to tell their own stories, but also to connect with external influencers and to have that peer-to-peer content creation. Because when, say for example, we've got 50 people, say we've got 20 people who are active on social, because some of our software engineers just head down writing codes, right? Not that active on social. So if there's 20 people connecting with maybe 60 to 70 external influencers, then you've really got the benefit of the employees networks and the external influencers networks, and then their second, third, and fourth degree networks. And that reach is something that we just could never get without an employee advocacy program.
And it's great to hear of the success that you've been enjoying. And right, especially in the B2B space, which I'm assuming, yes, that's a
Absolutely.
space you're operating in based on how you've described your business model. Uh, could you share with us then what was that journey like to establish your own program, your own employee advocacy program internally? Because you are so correct. And again, this is something we talk about on this podcast all the time. Just the efficiency and the effectiveness of employee advocacy as a way to build relationships, create community, build a brand, drive growth through generating and growing business. It's such a wonderful, wonderful avenue to do that. And I always like to understand, how did a company like Onalytica see this as a benefit that they can leverage to their own success? Could you give us a peek into that journey of the how, the where, the when it all
Yes,
started?
I can, because in 2014, we had 7 people. And so it's really me plus a couple of people building the product and, one salesperson, one marketer, just really starting at the grassroots. And then I thought, well, how can you build a global brand with 7 people and, when you can all see each other and you're thinking, well, we're not posting now and like no one's hearing about us. Like, how do we get that scale? So we identified who the key market influencers were, the industry thought leaders who were driving the category of B2B influencer marketing. And a lot of them were in the States. So I, it was really grassroots stuff. I jumped on a plane and I went to lots of conferences and I networked as much as I could. And I listened to the inspirational speakers, people like Brian Fanzone, Neil Schaefer, Jay Bear, lots of the people who were evangelizing social media marketing and influence marketing within that, and just introduced myself and then, showed them what we were about and started, trying to shine a spotlight on their success and build community. And it's turned full circle, 2022, where I'm now appearing on their kind of podcasts and they're interviewing me and saying that, nice things about me and Onalytica and how we're leading the category. And and that's just a really nice full circle journey for me, in that we're just completely unknown. And through technology and community relationships, shining a spotlight on other people, you can then earn the right to get parity with them and then achieve that. And then you've obviously got to stay there. So back in 2014, there was obviously no program at all. It's only been in the last 2 or 3 years where we've actually formalized a program around this. And that's been around trying to help people develop their personal brand. A lot of the employee advocacy program was just, instinctive, and it was me and 4 other people doing it. And then, 15 to 20 people started posting and we're all just, trying to evangelize together. And in the last 2 years, under Alicia Russell, who's our head of marketing, she's been formalizing the program and doing much more measurement and putting in training programs. So yeah, just since 2020, really, when the pandemic was hitting, did we start formalizing it and like trying to really sort of scale what we built.
And nothing like a great pandemic for you to hunker down and find creative and still very effective opportunities to really reach out. I mean, if you weren't digital and online and virtual before, it certainly did that for us, and certainly a great time for something like employee advocacy to thrive. I'm glad you used the word measurement, Tim, and I understand that you guys are now really doubling down on getting much better at that. But could you kind of give us a little bit of a sneak peek into the practical or tactical kinds of successes that you've enjoyed as a business through your employee advocacy efforts?
Yeah, measurement is a really interesting one because I'm a specialist in measurement. I mean, I run an analytics company. We're all about measurement. And then there's also just letting good behaviors and culture, run. I remember speaking to Adobe and asking them how they measure their employee advocacy program. They almost turned around and said, well, we don't, you know, and I'm sure if someone was listening from Adobe, then maybe someone would say, oh yeah, of course we do. But But the head of the program was saying, no, we're not big on measurement. We're big on investment in people and giving them, motivations to really sort of talk about what we do and to talk about the being an Adobe employee. So I've got one side of me when we're at Onalytica, which is don't over measure it, and the other side of me is that you can't manage anything that you can't measure. You have to measure every single thing. So I've got these sort of two voices in my head. Um, so I think you have to get the culture right and make sure measurement doesn't stifle it. But then when it comes to measurement, what we do is we connect up a lot of metrics together. So there's activity metrics to be able to see, obviously, who's posting and who's not. The main measurement that we look at is engagement, and we look at the total engagements per month, and we look at the average engagement per post. And we have complementary metrics such as percentage engagement out of your total audience to see whether you're really maximizing the quality of your content for your total size. So, for example, one person could get 1,000 engagements across the month. They could get 200 average engagements per post, so they would have posted 5 times. And whether they got an audience of 500 or 40,000, they would get a percentage of engagement as a total, and then you would see whether they're really maximizing the ability to activate that audience. So those are the main indications. We also look at this by department. We have a leaderboard at Onalytica to be able to show people who's doing well and who's not performing as well. It's not a stick to beat people with, but we do encourage people who are client facing to be able to have a profile which obviously personifies what we're preaching to the world. We can't say to our clients, it's really important to be on social media, engaging with influencers and creating influence generated content. If you've got a profile that hasn't been updated for the past 3 years. So I think there's that pressure to be who you educate other people to be. But I think in a lot of organizations, sometimes you're so focused, our client teams are so focused on our clients that sometimes their own personal brands might take us a step back. So we're just trying to get the right balance. That's how we measure it. And I give a KPI to a marketing team in terms of employee advocacy. And really it's a number of engagements from employees, but we also look at the number of engagements from external voices. And we look at both, because what you don't want to have is just to speak into an echo chamber. The two main channels we measure are LinkedIn and Twitter, who have different value. Twitter, there's a lot of industry experts, influencers. Obviously, there's some reputational changes at the moment. LinkedIn, there's sometimes a lot of engagement from your employees and your previous employees. And what we want to show is that we're driving engagement, but we're also getting the external impact as a business. So we're not talking an echo chamber just to ourselves, patting ourselves on the back or just speaking to like 20 or 30 people.
I love that, and I really appreciate your taking that deep dive, because you're right. The whole measurement conversation is one that is still in its genesis and it's evolving, and I think it's so important yet still for us to appreciate that everything we do, especially if you're having a brand building and a revenue generation conversation, if you're not measuring, how do you know something is working or not, or certainly the impact that it's having? But I also loved the fact that you shared with us, Tim, about your leaderboard and what you're doing to really onboard your team in this whole process of employee advocacy. Because, again, this is the internal marketing podcast. And of course, one of the key outcomes of employee advocacy is what one of the key inputs to having successful employee advocacy, certainly from where I sit, is internal marketing. It's how are we engaging and empowering our employees to become those advocates that we want to see online? And I'd love to get a little bit of a peek, if you could share with us, Tim, What are you doing in that respect? So I know I get it. It's not just about, well, this is what you guys have to do. Here's the leaderboard, go for it. It's the whole process of ensuring that you have the right culture and the right tools to be able to again engage and empower your team. What does that look like internally, especially from a culture perspective, to make that successful for you?
Yes. So we have a few things going on. I think we're not doing it on steroids, but we have some few really, really good things going on. The first thing is we're running personal branding sessions across the company and trying to train people on finding their voice. And that's been probably the biggest hurdle to a few people getting going. They feel like it should be the spokespeople for the company, but they don't feel like they have enough to say. Well, I know that they've got really interesting perspectives on things, but they just don't feel confident enough. So part of it is saying, okay, well, what part of our business, what part of influencer marketing and employee advocacy do you feel like you have a really passionate angle on? And what is your perspective on that? Because there's lots of different facets of that. It could be measurement, it could be how to identify influencers, it could be how to build thought leadership positions, or how to build a personal brand. And we can actually sort of, you know, help people on building their personal brand by talking about how to build a personal brand. Like we can actually sort of use the same model, which is quite a unique position. So it is trying to find that perspective and then also try to build it into their personal passions. So it could be that they like cars or they like sport, for example, and then they can start talking about analogies within sport and B2B influence marketing. So we found that to be really successful, and people move away from more dry content and start really really making some fun posts, which are getting some good engagement. Uh, and then I think it's really understanding what they want to achieve personally. Salespeople are trying to drive more pipeline, and there's obviously the sort of social selling element. So looking at how it can link up with Sales Navigator and their target accounts and how they can network with those people, and you're working with them on an individual basis. So those are the three main things. Where's their expertise in terms of what we do, their personal passions, and what are their personal objectives. Now, we run training sessions throughout the company. We have follow up with a few individuals, but I think we could be doing more on that. I think it's just generally that the marketing team are doing such a great job of putting on events and creating a lot of our own content that, um, I think in 2023, there's probably more room for individual, training and assistant for executives.
And if I were therefore, I guess, to extrapolate from what you would have shared, so your model is you're not really just providing content that people always necessarily cut and paste and post. You are empowering your team to really take the opportunity to share content that's not necessarily always generated by the brand, correct?
Yeah, and you are correct. I did miss out one point in that we do provide recommended content, especially on LinkedIn, because you can obviously use the tool to do that. What we found is that because the marketing team did such a great job, people were sharing very similar posts, and yeah, it was getting out far and wide. But we didn't want them to just be the mouthpiece of the brand to just recommend it. So what we've actually done in marketing is cut down some of the templated posts so that they have to input their point of view. So it's a really good point that you make. And we do the recommended content every couple of weeks. And we say like, these are 4 or 5 pieces of content that you could share. So it is to encourage, but it's also for them to pick one of them rather than if you put recommended content and there's just one and there's 50 people that see it, you are in danger of having 20 people sharing the same content, and obviously it's a bit counterproductive. So we've been round the houses a bit with that, but I think we've now got a good mix.
Thank you. And I raised the question specifically, Tim, because that too has been a bit of a debate on LinkedIn, especially. And folks reach out to me with their questions, and I see the dialogue where In the whole matter of employee advocacy, a lot of brands, a lot of companies seem to be quite concerned about the idea of having employees create or curate and share content that's not the cut and paste and post kind because of concerns around whether or not what they're doing will bring the brand reputation into disrepute. Do you have that concern? And if so, how do you mitigate or manage that risk as a brand?
Yeah, I don't have that concern because being entrepreneurial with 50 people, the upside is just so much better that, if someone said something that people objected to, then we would look at it and deal with it. And I think, we could manage the reputational risk, and I don't think it would really hurt us. So I'm not worried about that at all. But that's because we've got a lot of advocates within the industry, and I think I could explain if one employee went rogue, for example. But if I talk about it when I'm advising clients, I do totally appreciate that when you have organizations with tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people, then this is a real factor, especially if you're in finance or heavily regulated industry and pharmaceutical industry, for example. I think there's always a control trust balance that obviously the more controlling you are, the less trusted the content is and vice versa. So I think brands need to be brave but sensible. And of course, there are policies. Not that everyone reads them, of course, but there are policies and guidelines that you can keep people to. And I think the benefits outweigh the risks. But clearly, there are brands where employees have done some weird stuff or gone against the company code and they've got a reputational risk. I think, obviously people are going to be doing that verbally anyway. Social media is obviously a much more powerful and the post stays there quite often and you can't get rid of it if it's being picked up in different places. So I think it's definitely something for people to try and mitigate. But from myself, I don't worry about it at all.
Thank you. I appreciate your sharing your perspective. Tim, what's your view on employee advocacy as a tool that can be used by different types of companies in different types of industries? Because, again, monitoring the employee advocacy conversations, there is a thinking that says, well, it's something that's more akin to B2B companies, companies that operate in the B2B space specifically. And I can totally appreciate that. But then there is another school of thought that toggles between whether or not employee advocacy has a benefit in B2C companies. What's your view? Is employee advocacy better suited for some companies in certain industries than others?
It's a very good question. In B2B, I think employee advocacy great because it's easier to control the narrative. In B2B, there are fewer voices. And I think it really plays well with an ABM strategy. So at Onalytica, we link up the employee advocacy content and it's so targeted with social selling and ABM strategies. So it's very, very intentional. I think with B2C, I think it's really powerful from a recruitment and HR standpoint. And I think the content that works best is not, I work for an amazing company or my company is amazing at X, Y, and Z. I think it's the social purpose, it's the sustainability, it's the well-being part, and that is the real power in it, I think. So that's my perspective. I very much play in B2B, but I see the CSR, sustainability, social purpose just being above B2B or B2C. I think it just works across the board.
I agree. And I think even to executive thought leadership, I think both for B2B and B2C, those companies in any industry who have executives like the CEO, the CMO, perhaps, who is out there sharing valuable content and helping to build that community around the brand, I think is also a great opportunity. What are some of the key ingredients that you would say are necessary for employee advocacy to thrive and be successful in a business?
I think executive leader buy-in is absolutely critical. It's pretty easy at my company just because there's fewer people. But when you start getting into 5,000 employees and upwards, I think it's really important to have the executive buy-in. Then I think it's about having the right culture of the program. So the person that's running it to really understand what's in it for the employees. The third thing that I would say is to repurpose some budget and investment into employee generated content. I've been talking a lot with Sarah Goodall from Tribal Impact, who you obviously know. We had you on our um, LinkedIn Live, and we just keep on advising marketing directors to take some of their content creation or their paid media budget and invest in employees and specifically creating content. So it could be setting up a video interview, with an industry expert and helping them repurpose those social assets and building their profile. And that I think is very powerful. So those are the three that I would put forward.
Could you share with us, give us, I guess, a little cheat sheet on the lessons that you would have learned? So you've been doing this for a little while, and perhaps if you were to look back, there's some lessons that you would have learned, some things you would have done differently, maybe. And it's always great, I say, when folks are trying to roll something out, it's always a valuable opportunity to learn from someone else's experience. So could you share with us what are some of your biggest lessons learned on your journey in employee advocacy?
Yeah, it's such a good question. There's so many different ways to answer it. I would say that I'm an impatient person. So I always feel like there's no time. Because I feel like there's no time, I'm thinking, right, we need to do this straight away, or, here's what I think your personal brand is. Why don't you start, next week? And I think actually taking a step back to run an internal training session and speak to people about what their personal brand is would have been a better way to start. Because I kind of worked out mine and thought that other people would do the same. And then when people won't be as active, then I started asking, well, can you see the value, or what's can we help you, and then uncovered what the issues are later on. So I think really tried to write it down and help someone get that personal brand and then connect it up to what they want to achieve. It is a bit more of a time consuming exercise, but I would invest the time, especially when you have 10 to 20 people that you're starting with. So yeah, don't be impatient and invest the time there. That's number one. And then I think it is actually writing out the complete strategy. I'm a big fan of milestones, when you start the program. And so there's a long-term vision, of course, but there's also milestones and very clear KPIs that you want to hit, after 1 quarter, after 2 quarter. So I think to be very, very clear about what success looks like, those would be the main two. Because I think when you hit a target, then everyone says, well, tell me about the long-term vision. And if you just talk about the long-term vision, people say, yeah, but what do we get now? So I think you need both. And that's the advice that I try and give to myself and to anyone that I speak to.
From your perspective, how do you know whether your employee advocacy program is succeeding or not? What does success look like?
Through the KPI dashboard that we have on engagements, that is one measure. But the time that I felt that I just knew it was being successful is when we meet prospects and clients and they say, oh, Onalytica is everywhere. I see all of your content in the feed. I see other people sharing some stuff. And that I think is really good qualitative examples. I think you need those stories. Myself and other people get asked to speak at great podcasts like this or at events, and that's a really good validation. And also it's when you get inbound leads, I think, because I'm a big believer in content, community, and commerce. And if you create engaging content and then you have that community, then I think the commerce comes to you. And so when people say, I've been following your content on this, and I had some conversations with your colleagues, and I'd really like to have a conversation about a particular product, or outcome or challenge that they're having, that's the real marketing goal that I think you can see in that. So I don't track all of those and say how many inbounds or how many events we speak at, but I just hear the stories on a week to week basis, and that's good enough for me. Just knowing that it's driving business impact, we're getting the engagements, but I also can see the enjoyment that the staff have on building their personal brand. And to me, I'm in business, yes, to make money, to make investors money, but it's also about wanting to feel in 10 or 20 years time that I've helped people in their careers and had a good time. And I think that's a much sort of softer measurement for me that gives me personal satisfaction.
And I'd like to endorse that point because even just from my own vantage point, I got introduced officially to the Onalytica brand actually through Danielle Guzman. So I follow Danielle. So she doesn't work with Onalytica, but she's certainly part of your community. And I got introduced to your brand through her and her engagement with your content and being a part of your live stream, etc. And then through that started to follow you and then Sarah. And so by the time even we got the opportunity to meet on your live stream, I was very much familiar with your brand and with you and your company and with Sarah as well from Tribal Impact. So it's really very powerful. I will agree. Just the relationships, the community building, and what that can do to drive business your way. It's awesomely powerful, very efficient, cost efficient, way less expensive, and truly wonderful. Tim, this has been such a wonderful conversation. And my penultimate question that I typically ask, because we've been talking about so many great things today, you would have been sharing such wonderful nuggets of insight. So, for our listeners who would have been listening to everything you would have shared, what's that one key nugget or takeaway you'd like for them to come away with today?
The one key nugget would be align your program with everyone's personal passion and invest in the employees. And then you will get the business metrics that you need. You can link them up, no problem. But if you don't have the first part, then you don't have the magic of what a program can deliver.
I love that because at the heart of employee advocacy is people. And at the heart of internal marketing is people. And if the what's in it for me, the WIFM, as I like to call it, that's not aligned, then it's really not going to be successful. Beating folks over the head to share or generate content is not going to work. So I really, really appreciate that you shared that point. I would love to wrap this conversation, Tim, by inviting you to share with us how can we, the internal marketing tribe, support you? I know you put out such awesome content through you, your team, your organization, and we'd love to know how we can support you, Tim.
Support us personally. Well, thanks so much. I've never been asked that before. So that's amazing. I have created a guild community. So there's an app called Guild where we're building a community around influencer marketing, which is another form of employee advocacy. It's just called something different. So if you downloaded the app and joined our community, it's all about education about how we can invest in employee generated and influencer generated content. So just come and join the community. That's my only ask. Just come and join the conversation.
Wonderful. That sounds very, very exciting. And of course, for whatever tools our listeners need to kind of know how to connect, how to perhaps find a link to download the app, we're going to include all of that in the show notes so that they can go there and get access to all of that great information so they can jump in and join the community. Tim, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I really, really appreciate your time. And I wish for you and your team all the very best in all that you do. And thank you so much again for joining me.
Thank you, Kerry-Ann. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast. I hope you got some great takeaways from this conversation. And if you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, then please join the tribe. And don't forget, feel free to share this podcast with anyone whom you believe will find it valuable as well. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I look forward to your joining me next time.